LANDFIRE, and the Tallgrass Prairie, Oak Savannah, and Lake States Fire Consortia. Today's session is the Introduction to LANDFIRE, also known as LANDFIRE 101, with Randy Swaty of the Nature Conservancy's LANDFIRE team doing our presentation. We're recording this webinar, so your phones should be muted and your computer's microphone, internal microphone, should be muted as well. During the webinar and the Q&A session themselves, please use the chat window to write questions and comments. Randy will get to them during and at the end of the presentation, so don't hesitate if during the presentation you have any questions or comments. And be sure you address your questions and comments to everybody in the chat window, not just to Randy, so that we can all read them. Across the top of your screen, you should have a toolbar that allows you to open up the chat window. At the end of the webinar, we're going to put up a slide with everybody's contact information and with a link to the SurveyMonkey URL. I'm also going to put that in our chat window. Your feedback regarding this series is important to us and helps us direct future workshops and seminar offerings. This year, 2014, LANDFIRE and the consortia members and some consortia members of the Joint Fire Science Program have been working together to develop a series of webinars that provide information about LANDFIRE products and processes for large land management and planning. We started the three-part series in January on the West Coast and then moved to the Rocky Mountains and concluded the first half at the onset of fire season. We're resuming now, as you know, with Tallgrass Prairie, Oak Savannah, and Lake States. And we're also running the Southern Fire Exchange at the same time because the content for both is customized to that particular geographic region, but has the same messages. If you can't hit the TPOS Lake States, you can always hit Southern Fire Exchange, and there's plenty of information on our website about the series, so you'll get that URL at the end. We've recorded all of the webinars, and they're posted on our YouTube channel, and you can find that using the keyword LANDFIRE video. So we start with LANDFIRE 101 today. We'll offer the second in the series on October 8th, Assessing Needs, when Tracy Hemolowski, the Fire Information Specialist, presents Where Should We Burn? A Fire Needs Assessment for Wisconsin. She'll be talking a little bit more about that at the end of this presentation. And then the third in the series is on October 29th with Customizing Data with Don Helmbrecht, wildland fire analyst from the Forest Service in the team's enterprise unit. And he's presenting local customization of fuels data on the Huron, Manistee, and Hiawatha National Forests. Again, you'll be getting the links to all this information at the end of the presentation. I'll introduce Randy and then we'll get started. Randy received bachelor's and master's degrees at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, where his scientific focus was on spatial scales, ranging from community genetics to mycorrhizal ecology and landscape scale planning. He joined the Conservancy in 2002 in the Michigan chapter, where he worked with a variety of landowners to promote sustainable practices. He's worked to improve forest certification standards, has participated in conservation area planning, and global fire assessment programs. He served on the Conservancy's Forest Management SOP team. He joined us in LANDFIRE in 2007, where he develops vegetation models and directs workshops and seminars both inside and outside of the Conservancy on the use of LANDFIRE data and products. And we'll let you know that Randy is in the classroom right now. He'll tell you a little bit about who's in the classroom with him, recording this with his students. There we go. He's doing that outreach work. So, Randy, the webinar is yours. I'll move it to the next slide, and you can get going.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for participating today. We really appreciate your time. We know your time is really valuable, so we'll try to make the most of it. And as Jeannie said, I have 15 great students here at Northern Michigan University also with us today. They're sort of the live studio audience, which is really fun. So I'm going to go through a few slides introducing this thing called LANDFIRE, and I'm probably going to sound like a politician because it's really hard to nail down. It's such a big program with so many pieces and so many people doing amazing things. But here's the first slide, and I want you to focus on 3 words: partnership. LANDFIRE is really largely about a community that makes up LANDFIRE. It's academics, private consultants, students, and NGOs such as the Nature Conservancy are all contributing. Here you see maps and a funny model thing down at the bottom left. This is also part of the story, maps and models. But mostly to me, LANDFIRE is about people, ideas, and making the most of the products available to us to manage natural resources. Also, note the word vegetation. While named LANDFIRE, the program is not only about solving fire-related issues, but also about broader vegetation and values that are connected to it. So here's the official statement from the website. You guys can all read this, but I want to again point out a few words that are most meaningful to me. LANDFIRE is innovative. While I say LANDFIRE is big, it's also aiming to be nimble at all times. And I point this out to you probably to say LANDFIRE is not stagnant. It's not just a stagnant set of maps that live out on the internet and just stay there as is. We're constantly updating the data, and we're constantly looking for your feedback. So you'll also see words periodically update. I'll go into the LANDFIRE refresh and remodel process in a little bit. And also I want to draw your attention to the word consistent. We try to be consistent across the country in our mapping and modeling techniques. When I first came to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, we had problems with landscape scale planning because we didn't have data that crossed all ownerships, or we didn't have data that crossed state boundaries that we could compare to each other. So LANDFIRE aims to be consistent, so you could do assessments across the Great Lakes region, for example. All right, and then my third attempt to explain this thing called LANDFIRE. These are probably my favorite bullet points. It's spatial models and descriptions, which you'll learn about today, tons of spatial data sets, and probably even most important to me, a way of thinking, a way of going about data modification, data collection, and data development. And it's a vibrant community of users, hackers, and contributors. And when I say hackers, I mean that in the positive sense of the do-it-yourself culture that's emerging, it seems like globally, as we're able to share information and discuss across large areas and share ideas. Also, you'll notice the musical icon at the bottom. So to me, as I travel around the country and talk to people about LANDFIRE, I'm afraid some people view LANDFIRE as something that they are stuck with, sort of like you might be stuck in an elevator with elevator music. And I would hate for your view of all music to be elevator music, just like I would hate for you to be stuck with LANDFIRE data in some fire program analysis situation where you have to use it as is, or maybe you don't get to experience the vibrant community or the wide range of LANDFIRE data sets. So I want you to think of it more as an orchestra, and if you're lucky and have the need, maybe you can be the conductor someday doing your own interpretation of how you use the data sets and develop the models. And also it gives you a chance to pick and choose what you like. So I'm trying to broaden the toolbox analogy and think about music as a way to explain this thing called LANDFIRE. So LANDFIRE is technically two spatial data sets that you use in ArcMap or other platforms. It's also models that describe how the ecosystems of the United States looked and worked prior to European settlement. We call this reference conditions. So to me, LANDFIRE produced the country's first encyclopedia of ecosystems. This might be hyperbole. I can't cite anybody on that, but to me it sort of is. We described how the ecosystems looked and worked prior to major European settlement, and to do this, the Nature Conservancy ran dozens of workshops with hundreds of experts who first described the ecosystems, how they looked and worked. Then they modeled the disturbances to get an estimate of how much each developmental stage or succession class will be on the landscape. These descriptions and models were then reviewed, QA/QC'd and available to you here on this website that you see there, that we will share later with you as well. All right, so here's sort of how the models look, and this might be more what you think of when you think of models, something that may be a little confusing to look at and hard to understand, maybe developed by a postdoc somewhere. But these models were developed in Vegetation Dynamics Development Tool, which is open source, fairly easy to use software, believe it or not. And it's been replaced by software called STSIM. So ST-SIM, state and transition modeling software that we use to enter in the parameters of the succession classes, up to 5, then the natural disturbance regimes and their impacts. These natural disturbance regimes include 3 types of fire: wind, flooding, insects, and also can have user-defined disturbances such as beaver or bivy. You'll note that in these reference condition models, we did not include invasives or logging or fire suppression. Those are sorts of changes you would go in and enter in yourself into STSIM if you ever wanted to play with the LANDFIRE models. These also are accompanied by a description document that describes the site characteristics, species, geographic ranges, etc. for each biophysical setting or BPS. Models used to estimate reference conditions for the BPS, specifically how much of each succession class would be on the landscape. And I'm going to go into an illustrative graph here that I hope helps you understand what I'm talking about. And I apologize for pulling a western hemlock example. I should have northern hardwoods or maybe Music dry oaks or something like that, a little more relevant. But this will serve to give you the idea. What you'll note is that each succession class is defined by species, canopy height in meters, percent cover, represented generically as open or closed here, but mapped in 10% categories. You can see that with this western hemlock system, historically there would have been roughly 70% of the landscape in the tall, closed canopy succession class. So LANDFIRE maps where the succession classes are currently. We didn't historically because they would have moved around on the landscape. To get the vegetation departure, which is the difference between reference condition and current conditions, LANDFIRE uses a fairly simple method that generates a high number where the current percentages of succession class is very different from reference, a low number where the ecosystem is similar to reference conditions. Here you'll note that the taller succession class is underrepresented on the landscape and the shorter succession class is overrepresented. And I have to note here that this is not a prescription. This is context and background for your landscape. LANDFIRE is not saying that reference conditions are necessarily the same as desired future conditions. That's for you to determine on your landscape. All right, so this is what the web page looks like where you go to get the models. And you'll note that there are polygons distributed around the United States. Those are USGS data delivery polygons, and they don't really make any sense. They're not political polygons, and they're not ecological. So, for example, if you wanted to explore all the models of Michigan, you would have to download map zones 51, 50, and others to make sure you covered the whole state. But I wanted to point that out, and again, we will make sure that you get this link so you don't have to write this down. Also, as I mentioned, and one of my favorite parts of LANDFIRE really is this model description. So this is where the experts, here we had Robin Willis, Kyle Merriam, and Dana Standifer for the North Pacific oak woodland example. Go in and describe again what these biophysical settings, where they would occur, geographically, which soils, climate, and other factors that would help mappers then map the biophysical settings. And then they went in, and believe it or not, we had hundreds of experts using VDDT, Vegetation Dynamics Development Tool, to then get the percentages of the succession classes. So this is what I call the Encyclopedia of Ecosystems, and it's just an amazing amount of information. For Map Zone 51 here in Michigan, it's roughly 223 pages of ecosystem descriptions. They're fairly thorough. I will say that we are currently in the process of reviewing them. While they were peer-reviewed in QA/QC, we know there can be improvement, so we would love your review and help with that. So to summarize, the models represent how the ecosystems of the United States worked prior to major European settlements. There's the textual description, it's sort of like metadata, if you will, that you can look at all by itself. It's sort of standalone. And then the model, which you would then need to use in VDDT or now STSIM. It's not a prescription. The models are easy to hack or modify. It's easy to go in and suppress fire. It's easy to go in and add logging or invasives, and easy to add in new succession classes that might represent what would happen under a climate change scenario. So we'll be doing some presentations on modeling later in the year, so stay tuned, and we can help you learn more about these models. And I'm always available to help you explore the models in the software. So these are the products that people are probably most familiar with, the spatial products or the GIS data. This is a list of the major data sets, though there's more available. And I'm going to point out a few here. One, you'll note that there is the biophysical settings data. So that represents where those ecosystems would have occurred historically based on climate, superficial geology, soils, and other factors. Then we have a suite of existing vegetation data such as type, height, and cover. Under the fire regime, you see reference fire regime information, and I want to make it clear that that is historic fire regime information. It's not necessarily what's happening today. LANDFIRE does not produce, for example, a fire regime data set, or fire risk, data set for today's landscape. However, the fire regime data sets are really useful for giving context and helping you make a case as to why we need a restoration in the Great Lakes or the Tallgrass Prairies. Also, under the fuels data, you'll find the data sets required to run FARSIGHT and FlamMap. And now also, and this is where you guys all come in, we have disturbance data from 1990 to 2008, and soon we'll have it up to 2010. This is data detected by change detection or remote sensing, and importantly, write this down, submitted by all you guys. So it's really important to submit your data to LANDFIRE, especially if you were to say do a single tree selection harvest where you don't reduce the canopy a lot, or you did an understory burn. Those might not be picked up by remote sensing, so we rely on users to submit that sort of data. And the disturbance data is really cool to look at. You can really get a picture of how much disturbance is happening on the landscape. So with this picture, I want to show you a couple things. First, LANDFIRE data is wall-to-wall, as I mentioned, going across the country. I also want to say the spatial data is integrated, so all those data sets I showed you earlier can interact with each other. The data is delivered as 30-meter pixels in raster format, and so while we distinguish one 30-meter area from another 30-meter area, it's not to say you drill in and look at your favorite 30-meter area. So I'm going to peruse through some of the example data sets for you. Here's the existing vegetation type, and you'll notice the legend. It's been grouped by Natural Vegetation Classification System subclass. If you were to break it out, there would be many more EVTs or existing vegetation types mapped. But it's really fun to look at these maps, and it's always provocative to review maps with partners and stakeholders. There's nothing like a map to get people going and to get the darts out. So the next map you'll see is existing vegetation cover represented in 10% increments, separated out by herbaceous, shrub, and tree canopy. And with this map, I'll point out what I call my favorite pixel syndrome. I see it happen all the time, where somebody sees a map like this and they drill into where they take their families on picnics all the time, or the standard that they've been managing with their grandpa for 30 years. They look at that pixel, they see it's wrong, then they dismiss the whole data set. I see it happen all the time. So LANDFIRE data is developed for use at large scale. So if you drill into your favorite picnic area, you may find a mistake, but if you zoom out, you may find that the patterns are really useful. Existing vegetation height. I do want to point out the legends here. Say if you're using LiDAR data or other more detailed local data, you can break out the categories finer. But these are the categories you'll see in LANDFIRE. The, say, forest, 0 to 5 meters, 5 to 10 meters, 10 to 25 meters, and so on. So this is important to point out for you guys. So when you use the data, you'll understand the legends and the sort of scale that the data is supposed to be used. We combine the biophysical settings data, the existing vegetation type, height, and cover data to map succession classes. And a couple things here, it's sort of maddening for people. We all want succession class A to be first or, right after a major disturbance, and that is true. However, succession class E is not always, say, old growth. So you have to couple your interpretation of this map with looking at those BPS descriptions so you'll understand what the succession classes really are. And also, I'll point out that we do map uncharacteristic exotic vegetation. I would say that in general, especially for our region, it's probably undermapped, but it's a great start. So if you know of existing exotic vegetation data that you can point us to improve this data set, we would love to hear from you. All right, here's one of those maps I was talking about earlier, the historic fire regime groups. Again, this is historic. This is not the fire regime condition on the landscape today. I'm sure you picked that out immediately, but what this says to me is that there was an amazing amount of fire in our region historically. And so if you were to go into this data set and do some review and couple it with what you know about the ecosystems, you could start to figure out how much fire would have been on the landscape historically. For example, I calculated Wisconsin would have had at least 1.4 million acres of fire a year historically. And it's truly amazing because when I've presented that, people have thought that it's low. But there historically was a lot of fire in our region, so this can help you make that case. All right, so getting this cool spatial data, there's two ways. My favorite way is the LANDFIRE Data Access tool. It's a toolbar that adds into ArcMap that is free and really simple to use. You draw a rectangle around your area of interest, and then off you go. Also, if you don't want to do it that way, there's the LANDFIRE data distribution site, and both of these methods can be found at landfire.gov. Importantly, our YouTube channel has tutorials on both methods, and they're fairly short and clear and easy to follow. So if you have ArcGIS on your computer and want to start exploring the spatial data, I don't think it'll take you very long. You can watch the YouTube channels and get going, or you can always contact any of us on the LANDFIRE team, and we'll be glad to get you going. It's raster data, which is sometimes new for people, but it's fun. I think it's great to explore maps, so I would be happy to help you do that anytime. So here's sort of a summary of the spatial data. Dozens of 30-meter pixel raster data sets. You can refer to landfire.gov for the list, and also you can contact me. There may be data sets that aren't primary data sets listed on landfire.gov that we can get. It's designed for large landscape analysis. For example, comparing watershed to watershed or looking across a state or a large part of a state. People always want to know how small of an area they can use the data for, and we get squirmy and we sound like a politician again, and I would say the more you review the data, the smaller area you can look at. So I've gone down to 10,000 acres, but that's when I've had extreme levels of review and understanding of the data with a lot of local experts. And interestingly, one of the most used data sets is the topographic data set. And I'm watching the chat box, so please let me know if you have any questions. I don't see any yet, but I'm happy to entertain those as we go if I'm confusing anyone. All right, importantly, as I said, LANDFIRE is not a static program or just catalog of data. It's a really dynamic program. And so here's a quick chart that illustrates the data sets. The original products were called LANDFIRE National, completed in 2009 and represent conditions on the ground around 2001. In 2001, we did some almost immediate systematic updates based on feedback from users. Then in 2008, we started delivering data sets that, 2011, you'll see the completed line. We started delivering data that was circa 2008. And now every 2 years, we're updating the data largely based on your disturbance information. So please send that to us. And we have planned a full remap, which will be different than the refresh process, which I'll go over a little bit here. So imagine you have the LANDFIRE national data set, and then you have remote sensing, wildfire databases, and events from you guys. And then we get the disturbance data set that you see in the middle of the screen. We transition vegetation types based on a database and that information you give us. So if we have, for example, a closed canopy red pine forest that was selectively harvested, maybe it was a plantation and they took out every other row, we might convert that succession class from red pine closed canopy to red pine open canopy. Or if you did a clear cut in that red pine, we might transition it from red pine to a prairie type or a grass type based on the transition databases. So the remap, however, will be we'll be using totally new imagery and some new processes and new technology as available. Also, if you're lucky, you'll get to go to the South Pacific, work in Guam or the Marshall Islands, or maybe you could go down to Puerto Rico or Virgin Islands on a detail and use LANDFIRE data there as well. We've added that data recently. I will note I have not had that luck to go down there and check out that data, but I hope to someday. As I've mentioned, LANDFIRE plus users equal better products. Here's a map of the plot data we have, and this does not represent the FIA data that we use. But an example of how important users are to our mapping effort, we present this map, and we have over 800,000 geo-referenced plot locations, many of which came from you guys, plus we use forest inventory and analysis data. We use the plot data to train our satellite imagery software to better identify vegetation on the ground. Also, when possible, we use your direct feedback to improve our maps. It's difficult because we want to be consistent. So, for example, as folks at University of Wisconsin and Wisconsin DNR work to develop better LANDFIRE type data sets, we will not be able to stamp your local data into the map because it has to be consistent. However, if you can give us rule sets that help us map better, we will do that. So there's sort of a subtle distinction there. We can't stamp in your inventory data, but we can take the rule sets or feedback and try to work it into a consistent process. So I also want to go into a couple local uses and sort of a teaser. So Jack, who is on the call, McGowan Stinsky, myself, and partners across Michigan work to identify priority fire management areas in Michigan. And I show this just to illustrate the scale that LANDFIRE data is designed to be used at. It was one of multiple data sets used here. So it's kind of rare that LANDFIRE data is used on its own in any analysis. However, it's used in conjunction with other data sets. So I'll also note that we're keen to update this map with your input. It's getting a few years on it now. We'd love to see use and some update efforts. Also, more currently and exciting, Tracy, who's on the call as well, will be presenting the fire needs assessment for Wisconsin, which also use LANDFIRE's existing vegetation type data as part of a multi-data set assessment. So you can see, I'm sure that we could all go in and start picking apart, well, I don't know if it should be red exactly there or not red there, but you can start to see some patterns across Wisconsin. And so Tracy's going to go into that in more detail soon. So I've mentioned several data sets, and we have several fire uses. We're starting to collect some non-fire uses of LANDFIRE data on the WAM, my favorite acronym ever, the Web Hosted Applications Map, exclamation point. So you can go to maps.tnc.org/landfire, and we're going to start adding fire uses on here as well. It'll probably be a different icon because the map will be getting busy, but there are tons of people doing cool things with LANDFIRE data. People customizing it for their local uses, mashing it together with other data sets. It's just amazing the creativity and the technical prowess people are sort of employing with LANDFIRE data. So with that, I will continue watching the chat box, and we'll turn it over to Jeannie to introduce some of our outreach efforts. And we also, I'll quickly note that the WAM has over 82 points on it right now, and we'll probably have 200 if we add in the fire stories as well. But off to Jeannie and outreach. And again, I'll be watching the chat box, and we'll be happy to entertain any questions.
Thanks, Randy. We went through that really quickly, but our goal is to try to keep you guys into under an hour. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. And a little bit about what I do. I'm communications lead, and I moderate and provide content for a few websites. The one that is probably most interesting to your uses is on the Conservation Gateway, which is the Nature Conservancy's hosted website. And the content here is a bit different from the Conservancy's public site, nature.org, in that what's posted on the Gateway is intended for an audience that includes scientists, practitioners, landscape managers, and it covers across not only fire and landscapes, but we've got marine and climate change and global initiatives and all that sort of thing. On the Gateway site, LANDFIRE is offering 7 bullets with all kinds of drill downs on this. So the models and spatial data support, and by support you can reach any one of us. Applications, we have, I've lost track of how many applications we've put up there right now, and we haven't remotely skimmed the surface. So as Randy has asked you for input on the work that you're doing so we can keep the data up to date, if you're using LANDFIRE on the ground, I'd love to hear about it in a paragraph or so, and we can follow up on that. Our MAPS GIS is factored into 2, interactive and inert, for lack of a better word. You'll find some resources there, including some websites where we see some maps that we find interesting. Our library has about a half a dozen drill downs, including bibliography, our presentations, links we like, and more than that. Our news and updates, we attempt to keep the most recent information at the top of that. We post our bulletins there, and postcards and all our outreach materials will be sitting on news and updates, and then the contacts, the full page of how you can reach all of us. In summary, in terms of what we're doing online, we have this huge repository. It's a living program. It's a community that delivers. We have reference condition models, vegetation, fire fuels, dozens, hundreds, research tutorials, documentation, adaptation. How do you find all that? I'm going to fast forward to this and then back up. LANDFIRE National is the mothership, and the website there I think of as this is the science hub. It is where the tools and the data reside. It's all free. You can download whatever you need and use it. There's a help desk there as well. Conservation Gateway, I just mentioned, is our home. We have a Twitter feed. Try to get out 3 or 4 tweets a day at nature_landfire. If you use Twitter, we invite you to follow us, of course. And on YouTube, keyword LANDFIRE. If you key in LANDFIRE video, that'll get you straight to us. LANDFIRE is going to bring up all kinds of LANDFIRE-related videos, which may or may not have anything to do with the Conservancy and landfire.gov. So keyword LANDFIRE video. You can always reach us at landfire@tnc.org, and you'll see the little note I wrote there, newsletter, write us. We send out a newsletter every other month or so. alternating it with a postcard, which is usually a couple of bullet points about latest news and information. We're moving to MailChimp. You need to request to be on our newsletter email list. If you would like to be on our newsletter list, please send me a note at landfire@tnc.org, and I'll get you on it for sure. There's also a question about that on the SurveyMonkey, that link that you'll see at the end of our presentation today. So I want to back up here for a second and talk about the next two presentation webinars that we have coming up with TPOS and Lake States on October 8th. We mentioned assessing needs. Tracy is on the call right now. Tracy, if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself and tell us a little bit about what's coming up on your presentation on October 8th, that would be grand.
Yeah, thank you. Hi everybody, this is Tracy Himilowski. I'm going to be speaking on October 8th for the Assessing Needs portion of the webinar series. So I work with the Tallgrass Prairie and Oak Savannah Consortium, and in the past year we've been working with the Lake States and LANDFIRE and partners from agencies all over the upper Midwest, but predominantly in Wisconsin, to come up with this map that uses the LANDFIRE existing vegetation layer to identify areas that are a really high priority for prescribed fire. And it's been this process of bringing together stakeholders and showing them maps and going through the process and having them make key decisions. And so it's something that we haven't done in a vacuum. We've been doing with stakeholder involvement and getting this feedback so that it's a really useful product in the long run. So I look forward to sharing that with everybody on October 8th, and we hope that you can make that call too.
Thank you. Then following Tracy on October 29th, Don Helmbrecht. Don did a presentation for us on the Northern and Southern Rockies as well. He's really active out there using our tools and data. He'll present local customization of fields data on the Huron, excuse me, I hope I don't mispronounce this, Menistee and Hiawatha National Forests. His presentation, off-the-shelf LANDFIRE data is intended to support broad sub-regional to regional scale strategic planning efforts, but maybe 3 to 5 years out of date at the time of application. Don's going to show how local knowledge and expertise can be used to update LANDFIRE data for applicability at finer scales, with examples from work on these two areas. As you can see, he's a wild LANDFIRE analyst with the Forest Service on the team's enterprise unit. This whole idea of customizing data is where you on the ground come in as very important partners. LANDFIRE is at large landscape level, but it can be customized using our tools and data to the local level, and we really appreciate getting local expertise involved in keeping our products up to date and accurate. Once again, our links. Conservation Gateway, when you land on our home page, there's a right-hand column, and it's our latest news link. And in there, you'll be able to click on the link about the series and get all the information, including previous recordings and PDFs. So here we go. This is our last slide. Questions or comments? There's a LANDFIRE team. You can reach any of us directly. Corey, Jim's our leader, and he's in Jacksonville, Florida. Corey's out of Bend, Oregon. Randy, you know, is in Marquette. Sarah Hagan is in Minneapolis. I'm in Boulder, Colorado. For a team where everybody lives in a different place, we meet every week, and we have retreats together twice a year. So we're easy to reach, and we're in touch with each other. Craig, Jack, Tracy, here's their contact information. I'll remind you that we have a SurveyMonkey that we'd like you to give us some feedback on this webinar at the end. And we'll open now for questions, comments, ideas. We know we went through this pretty quickly, and hope that we can help you a little bit further on this webinar. So if you have anything you'd like us to address, please go ahead and put it in the chat window now. We'll get right to it.
Yes, thanks, Jeannie, and thanks to everyone for participating today. And I am definitely open for questions, comments, ideas today, or email if you prefer, or think of something later. As Jeannie mentioned, I did kind of fly through that, so you can watch the recording over and over again and memorize everything on it if you want, or call us.
I don't see anyone typing. Jim Smith believes that if we don't get questions and answers at the end, that somehow we've come up short. I believe that if we don't get questions or comments at the end, that we've covered what you need to know. So as Randy indicated, here's the contact information for all of us. Write to me at landfire@tnc.org if you'd like to be put on our newsletter list. Please fill out the SurveyMonkey. The link is in the chat window at the right, and I think that Jack may be putting up the link as well following this particular presentation. Thanks, everybody, for giving us your lunch hour, or as it may be, your early morning coffee break. Steve, Randy, we've got a question here. Can you read it?
Yes, I see that. And Steve, I very much appreciate that. And I probably cannot change the motivation level. It is definitely, the LANDFIRE data is definitely for use at larger areas. You know, if you drill down to 10,000 acres, it may work pretty well, especially with some review. And what people do a lot of times is they'll use the LANDFIRE data for context in which to consider management at the stand level. But definitely understood, and thanks for that. Thanks for that comment. Okay, question from Bob. How is LANDFIRE tied to the National Wildfire Coordinating Group? I do not know the specifics on that. However, I'll say that LANDFIRE is tightly tied to the National Wildfire Coordinating Group. And Bob, if you'll drop me a line, I can find out more on that. So by specifics, I don't know exactly who talks to who and how often. But I know there is a tight link and that they are one of the partners in LANDFIRE. I feel like I saw someone else typing as well. Yes, thanks for those comments and questions. Okay.
Let's step in and close the webinar right now. I see people are running off to grab their lunches. And appreciate your attendance, welcome your comments, and hope you'll be able to join us for the next couple of webinars with TPOS in the Lake States. So enjoy the rest of your days. Thank you.